Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas and today we're looking at possibly the bleakest weekend in Grand Prix history. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. It was the weekend of April 29th, April 30th and May 1st of 1994, round 3 of the World Championship. Obviously, in my previous episode, basically I did talk about the bleakest weekend being the 1960 Belgian Grand Prix, but that had 2 drivers killed, 2 drivers injured, and a lawsuit by Team Lotus. This one is much worse, and I'll explain it to you carefully. So the San Marino Grand Prix, known as the Grand Premier de San Marino, round 3 of 16, on the original layout of Imola for the Formula 1, which they've used at that time since 81. And heading in, Schumacher was leading with 20 points ahead of Georgian's Rubens Barrichello on 7 points, and Damon Hill on 6 points. Tied on points were Berger and Alesi on 4 points, but Alesi was not running that weekend because he was injured prior to the Pacific Grand Prix the previous round and injured his neck, so Nicola Larini took over. 2 driver changes prior to that was JJ Leto replacing Jos Verstappen at Benetton. Leto was slated to have driven the first 2 rounds in Brazil and in Aida, but broke a vertebrae in his neck and couldn't drive the opening 2 rounds, so Verstappen filled in. Although Verstappen were tired from both occasions, the first one wasn't his fault, second one spinning out on cold tyres. The other one was Andrea de Chez was driving for Jordan. He had replaced Eddie Irvine, who was suffering a race suspension. Irvine was supposed to have had a 1 race ban, but Jordan appealed it, only for that to be increased to 3. So, on the Friday, 29th of April, practice went to plan, although a couple of spins and all that. But then Rubens Barrichello's Jordan hit a curb at Vente Bassa, which was basically the 4th and final part of the chicane, at 140 miles an hour, launching into the air. On top of the tyre barrier, knocked unconscious at an impact measured at 95 G. Barrichello's car rolled several times, coming rest upside down. Medical teams treated him trackside. Barrichello suffered a broken nose. He also swallowed his tongue, so FIA Dr. Sid Watkins saved his life, having to do medical procedures to make sure that Barrichello's tongue was not swallowed anymore. Thankfully, Barrichello survived that. Broken nose for Barrichello and sprained wrist as well. When Barrichello regained consciousness, he found Senna looking over him at the medical centre. After learning Barrichello survived, Senna returned to his car and continued his practice session. As it was his part to say, Senna was concerned about his fellow drivers. Despite a spin early in qualifying, Senna was fastest, 5 tenths ahead of Schumacher and Berger. Damon Hill was 7th, having spun over 1.6 seconds behind Senna. After the practice session, Senna left his car and went to the Williams motorhome to attend pre-arranged interviews for the press, and told the attending journalist to wait 1 hour as he was checking car problems with his engineer, David Brown. Brown had worked with Nigel Mansell and Aaron Prost to their championships in 92 and 93. The biggest point about these cars in 94, active suspension, traction control and so on were banned. So it was down to the drivers to drive the cars. Following the interviews, Senna continued to work with Brown for another 2 hours. Once he arrived back at his hotel in Castel San Pietro. Senna reportedly terrified his girlfriend, Andrea Castillo, and broke down in tears while recounting Barrichello's crash earlier that day. Saturday morning, they had practice. Senna set his best time of 1:22.3, and he agreed with teammate Damon Hill that the FW16 had been improved, because the first two races Williams had a car which was basically undrivable. Having been released from the medical centre, Rubens Barrichello told Senna he was flying back to England to watch the race on television. Qualifying Part 2 happened on Saturday afternoon. 20 minutes into the final qualifying session, Roland Ratzenberger, driving for Simtech, failed to negotiate the Villeneuve curve and hit the barriers almost head on. Although survival cell was intact, Ratzenberger was killed instantly as a result of a basal skull fracture. As soon as the car stopped, Roland was almost completely gone. It was his first season, and it was a result of front wing flare having run over the curb at the Acre Manuale chicane on his previous lap, which resulted in the front wing flare. Rather than return to the pit lane, he continued on for another fast lap, leaving him unable to control the breakage of the front wing. It was 15 minutes before the session restarted. Several teams, including Williams and Benetton, took no further part, and then later in hospital, Ratzenberger was dead as a result of the injuries. First time a driver fatality had happened on a Grand Prix weekend since Riccardo Paletti in 1982, and the first driver death in F1 since aerodynamics in the 1986 testing. Sid Watkins took Senna down to the Villeneuve curve where Ratzenberger had his accident, and he said that Ayrton broke down and cried on his shoulders. Watkins tried to pursue Senna not to waste the final day. What else to do? You've been world champion 3 times, you're obviously the quickest driver, give it up and let's go fishing. Senna replied to Watkins, Sid, there are certain things over which we have no control. I cannot quit. I have to go on. Senna was on the pole, having not set a lap time from Ratzenberger's death. Schumacher set his best time on the Saturday. Berger was third with his best time on Friday. Damon Hill improved to fourth with Leto fifth and Larini sixth. Barrichello failed to qualify as a result of the accident, first making him unable to race. Paul Belmondo in the Pacific also failed to qualify. Belmondo was offered 26th spot on the grid, but refused, saying that Ratzenberger earned the spot. After qualifying, Senna went back to the Williams garage where he summoned co-owners Patrick Head and Frank Williams, Head being designer part, being the designing role of Williams in his design role, determined the situation and decided to withdraw from the rest of the qualifying. Reportedly, Senna went back to the motorhome and was in tears and collapsed. Led to a concerned Williams who asked Russell, Senna's PR chief, just to check Senna's emotional state. Senna decided not to attend the post-qualifying press conference, leading to the FIA to discuss but decided not to take disciplinary action against him. However, race stewards called Senna in on race day, and this was during race day, and stewards took no action because Senna had taken a course car to visit the crash site. Wild ensued and Senna stormed off in disgust. During that morning, he basically recorded a scene basically to show for TF1 and for its co-commentator Alain Prost, who was once a teammate of Senna and was replaced by Senna after Prost decided to be paid not to race to allow Senna to drive after Prost vetoed Senna to join the team. So when said that to our dear friend Alain, we all miss Alain. Prost was amazed and touched by the comment. The pair rebuilt their friendship after a massive falling out over 1989 because of their feud when they were teammates at McLaren. After a driver's briefing, Senna attended along with Gerhard Berger. Since he was in speech to rail race officials left in still thought of emotion, there was concerns over the pace car, so Senna asked Berger to talk about it. Because the previous round in Aida they used a pace car to go around for the warm-up lap. However, they decided not to do that. Senna met with most of the drivers to establish the GPDA, starting with the next race in Monaco. Former world champion and then Ferrari advisor Niki Lauda suggested that Senna's lead a group of a strong personality relative to the other drivers. Obviously with the GPTA, it would be Senna, Gerhard Berger, Michael Schumacher as its first directors, basically to improve circuit safety. The race took place at 2 o'clock European time, 1 o'clock British time on May the 1st, 1994, in dry and sunny weather. Before the start, Michele Alboretto's Minardi was supposed to start 15th, but had to start race from the pit lane in his backup car after his race car developed a problem. Warm-up lap went as planned, and then at the start of the race, JJ Leto stalled his Benetton on the grid. Pedro Lamy in the Lotus, starting further back of the grid, had his view blocked by other cars, and the Lotus hit the back of Leto's Benetton. As a result of the whack, bodywork and tyres started to fly into the air. Parts of the car went over the safety fence and designed to protect spectators at the start line, caused injuries to 8 spectators and a police officer. Yet, a Southern police officer was injured in the wreck. Because of the wreck, the safety car was deployed, driven by German F3 driver, Italian driver Max Angelelli. Angelelli would later have a successful career in American sports cars. Whilst at reduced speeds, travelling slowly because the safety car which they had, the Opel Vectra, which is not my favourite car, had its brakes cooked, so Angelelli had to take it conservatively. And this was a problem, as I said earlier, with Senna and Berger concerned with the safety car. Only the third time it's been used before. First one was Brazil 93, when it was used for 9 laps because of the wet weather, which Prost crashed out, and then 93 Silverstone, as a result of the Chesris parking up. Senna was worried about a procedure where the safety car would lead a group, rather than let the race leader dictate the pace. It was removed and has never been used since. During the safety car laps, Eric Comas and Eric Bernard made contact. Comas made a pit stop to have problems with the Lewis pit crew. Once the track was clear of debris, the safety car was parked up and the race restarted on lap 5. Jonathan Palmer, who was in the commentary box alongside Barry Walker for the BBC's grandstand coverage, because at the time the race was shown live on grandstand, remarked that Schumacher was in the warm-up speculating that one pit stop because Schumacher in the warm-up had much heavier fuel, and that Senna was planning to make 2, as was conventional. Before the race started, Martin Brundle told Steve Ryder, who at the time hosted Grandstand, that McLaren were going to make 2 pit stops. On the 7th lap of the race, Senna's car went straight on and hit the concrete barrier at Tamburello. Going at speeds of 190 miles an hour, but the car slowed down to 131 miles an hour when Senna hit the wall. Senna was killed instantly in the crash. When they examined the car, they found a furled Austrian flag in the car. Senna planned to raise it after the race in honour of Ratzenberger. So 17 minutes into the start of the race and the red flag was out. And Sid Watkins arrived at the scene to treat Senna. When a race stopped and the red flag made their way back to the pit lane start grid, unless noted of a restart, which at the time was down to Roland at the time as race director. Whilst the medical teams were doing that, the Lewis team, which had been fixing Eric Comas' car, did not realise Senna had crashed. Sent Comas to the end pit lane for release despite the circuit being closed under red flags. There was so much confusion and went full bore and Comas went full bore into Tamburello only to see medical cars and a helicopter down there. Stopped. After seeing Senna's accident, Comas was so distressed and withdrew from the race and did not speak of what he witnessed for more than 10 years. Eurosport commentator John Watson said that it was ridiculous for Comas to do. Murray Walker, in the commentary box for the BBC, said it was ridiculous. How can that Lewis get out of the pits when there's a red flag? And Watson, who was commentating alongside Calf on Eurosport, said, "On God's back, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life." And that was a car being released under a red flag when a driver was being treated. At the time, obviously, currently Formula 1 has got its own world feed for all races by Monaco, which is Teo Monte Carlo, the rest being provided by F1 TV. Obviously, back in '94, it's down to the host broadcaster of each race, so it was Y in Italy. So, however, some corporations like the BBC, who were broadcasting San Marino Grand Prix live to their local viewers, BBC showing it at the time to the UK, found it too upsetting for general view, and around 1:20, abandoned Y's feed to focus on their own cameras in the pit lane. Other broadcasters, including ESPN, who did not commentate on site, they were in the US doing the commentary, took the BBC feed from the pit lane. Jean Todt, who was at the time team principal for Ferrari and, as we're speaking, the outgoing president of the FIA, said at the time, even if you didn't want to watch it, you could barely fail to. Televisions were being switched off, but that reports that, obviously, there were some false reports at the time saying because no one knew whether or not Senna was okay or not, but nobody knew the severity of it until later that evening. 15 minutes of on-site medical attention was what the medical team did, and then Senna was airlifted by helicopter to Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. Final driver to be omitted during the weekend. Medical teams continued to treat him during the fight. The race was restarted at 2:55 local. I'll talk to you about the rest of the race and then I'll switch to the Senna update, Senna and the position that he was in, and then second formation lap, outside Fraction installed his Sauber, leave the grid, and then Schumacher had a bad start, leaving Gerhard Berger to lead, but Schumacher was leading on aggregate because at the time, and I can say aggregate racing is not good. And then basically it got from bad to worse to catastrophe. On that 48, Miguel Alboreto came in for a pit stop, but as he left, his right rear wheel came loose and speared down to the pit lane, basically injuring 2 Ferrari mechanics, 2 Lotus mechanics. They were immediately treated, all of them later recovered, thankfully. And Schumacher went on to win ahead of Larini in his final outing for Ferrari as Alesi would come back from Monaco. Hakkinen was third, with Damon Hill winning out the top 6. It was 3 wins for 3 for Schumacher, and Schumacher said, "I can't feel satisfied, I can't feel happy." About Senna and the accident, after the accident, Senna had suffered some form of injury because he seemed motionless and leaning slightly to the right. Basically, there was a catastrophe in Harrison, Williams' team manager, tried to find information, finally seen by many race officials sensing that Senna's crash had been serious. But the accident at the time, head man of Formula 1 arrived to calm the situation. Senna had the truck, and most of the truck over it was conducted to secure an airway through the bed to make sure that he was breathing. But whilst that was going on, Sid Watkins said in a later interview, he looked serene. I raised his eyes, and it was clear from his pupils that he had a massive brain injury. We lifted him from the cockpit and laid him on the ground. As we did, he sighed, and I'm not religious, but I felt his spirits spoke at that moment. Watkins replaced the spirited practices, stemmed the blood flow, replaced lost blood, and immunised the cervix area for Senna, and then got the helicopter down to the hospital. At 3 o'clock, 28 minutes after the crash, helicopter landed. Doctors rushed Senna into intensive care. A brain scan confirmed the diagnosis made on the track. 10 minutes later, Senna's heart stopped beating. Doctors restarted it and placed on a life support machine. Senna's brother, Leonardo, arranged for a priest to perform the last rites, which occurred at 6:15. 22 minutes later, Senna's heart stopped again, decided not to restart it. One of the doctors was off duty and had been watching the race live, immediately left for the hospital, and the doctor in question confirmed that the blood loss was due to a damaged superficial temporal artery, and that, apart from his head injuries, and the doctor was responsible for providing medical updates, and at around 7 p.m. It was announced that Senna was dead at 6:40. Sometime after the race, Ian Harrison, Williams' team manager, was called by an Italian lawyer of Senna's death, and they treated it as a road traffic accident. Harrison was called again by another lawyer, who took him to a mortuary. Harrison declined to see Senna's body upon being asked. The FW16s were re-engineered by Newey to provide better handling at the request of Senna and Damon Hill. At the end of the season, cars were safer, and Imola had to be changed for 95 because of the tragedies. So, Senna's death was considered as a national tragedy in Brazil. The Brazilian government declared 3 days a national mourning. The Brazilian government flew Senna's coffin from Imola back to Sao Paulo, Senna's hometown. And the Senna's coffin was accompanied by his younger brother Leonardo and close friends, covered up with a large Brazilian flag. The funeral on May 5th was live on Brazilian television. 3 million people lined the streets. Lots of people. Alan Prost, Garberger, Jackie Stewart, Damon Hill, Terry Boutsen, Rubens Barrichello and Emerson Fittipaldi were the pallbearers. Watkins and Joe Ramirez, who at the time was McLaren team coordinator, did not attend as they were so grief-stricken. Senna's family did not allow Bernie Ecclestone to attend. Max Mosley instead attended Roland Ratzenberger's funeral, which took place on May 7th, 2 days after Senna's. Mosley said in an interview later on, "I went to Ratzenberger's funeral because everyone went to Senna's. I thought it was important as someone went to his. Senna was buried in Military Cemetery in Sao Paulo. His grave bears the pronounced Nada Pod Me Spear do Amos de Des." I don't know what that means, which means nothing can separate me from the love of God. Floral tributes were done at the Tokyo headquarters of Honda. And Senna had a special relationship with the founder, Shoei Honda. For the following round in Monaco, first 2 grid spots were left vacant in memory of Senna and Ratzenberger. ESPN, who covered the race in Imola, also covered the NASCAR Instant Select 500 live. While the race was under a caution period on lap 111, which Dale Earnhardt was leading, lead commentator for NASCAR at the time, Bob Jenkins, passed along the word of Senna's death to the viewing audience. To honour Senna, the broadcast proof of Jenkins, along with 2-time NASCAR champ Ned Jarrett and 1973 NASCAR champ Billy Parsons, went silent, came round, and then the moment of silence ended when a multiple accident caused another caution flared with 2 laps of the race. Earnhardt would go on to win that race, but in victory lane dedicated his win to send out his condolences to Senna's friends and family. And basically, although amongst Senna's millions of fans was a young Brad Keselowski, 2012 NASCAR champ, and the Keselowski drew parallels between the deaths of Senna and Earnhardt, who lost his life in 2001, in a piece of NASCAR website, which I will leave in the link below. In Brazil, the country's television network spent the rest of the day interrupting normal programs schedules to announce Senna's death when replays last interview. Many motor racing fans gathered outside Majority Hospital to pay their respects to Senna, causing major traffic jams across the route down to the hospital. Fans also gathered in the Williams factory in Didcot, where they were based at the time. 200 people attended flowers laid. Italian and Brazilian press were critical for all changes that were enacted in '94. Schumacher called for improvements in safety. Murray Walker called Senna's death as the bleakest weekend he could remember. 2.5 months after Senna died, Brazil won over Italy in the World Cup, and they later dedicated their victory to Senna. On May the 3rd, a meeting was requested by the FIA at the request of the Italian Automobile Club to review the events. New safety measures were in place for the final round of Monaco. 3 changes: entry to and from the pit lane controlled by a curve to force cars to run at reduced speed. No team personnel will be allowed on the pit lane surface except for those directly involved working on a car during a scheduled pit stop. A draw will be arranged to determine the scheduled order in which cars should make pit stops. Stops made out of these designated orders will be limited to emergencies only, and cars that will not be allowed to take on fuel or move tyres. Williams ran tests on their rigs to replicate Senna's accident, and data retrieved. They attempted to simulate mechanical failure, which was not proven conclusive. At Monaco, Niki Lauda, who was retired at that point, and obviously advisor to Ferrari, announced reformation of the GPDA. It'd be Schumacher, Berger and Brundle at the end of the season. GPA demanded improved safety of Formula 1. FIA quickly responded. So for Spain, size of fuses reduced, front wing end plates raised, front wings size reduced, reduced downforce 15%, Canada onwards, protection of driver's head would be improved, increased the height of the sides of the cockpits, minimum weight of the car increased by 25 kilos, changed to 15 kilos by Canada. Front wing wishbones strengthened to reduce the possibility of a front wing coming loose and striking the driver. Cockpit lengthened to prevent drivers striking their heads on the front of the cockpit. Use of petrol would be imposed. Airboxes for the engines would be removed to reduce the airflow to the engines and thus decrease the power available. Other changes: improved crash bars, redesigned tracks and tyre pairs, high crash safety standards, eye steels on the driver cockpits and limit them freely to engines for 95. FIA investigated the Imola track, and the track's signature turn was changed to a left-right chicane as a result. From the German Grand Prix onwards in 94, planks were used and still are today. A 500-page report in February 95 concluded that Senna's crash to a steering column failure caused by a pre-race adjustment. And then there was an autopsy, and basically found that Senna was killed instantly. However, Imola 94 caused more problems. I will go to the race bit in a moment, but I will come back to that at the end. One of the doctors basically checked through the autopsy and found that Senna died at 2:17 p.m, which was the time of the crash, coinciding with several deaths under Italian law. The FIA and Italian Motorsport Authority still maintain Senna was not killed instantly but rather died in hospital. And even today, the debate still goes on. Under Italian law, it states collisions resulting in a fatality must be investigated for any criminal culpability. Activities that cause the fatality, such as a sporting event, must be suspended forthwith and the scene of the crash secured. One doctor from Portugal had this statement: from the ethical viewpoint, the procedure used for Senna's body was wrong, involved dysphagia, which means a person has been kept alive improperly after biological death, which was taking place because of brain injuries so serious that the patient will never be able to remain alive without medical means of support. And it goes on. And then 3 different doctors gave their views. Prosecution happened found not guilty. An appeal upheld the acquittals, rejecting to request from prosecutors to give 1 year suspended sentences to Eddie Newey. In 2002, Senna's chassis was returned to the Williams team, and it was so deteriorated it was destroyed. Senna's helmet was returned to Bell Helmet Company and incinerated. The car's engine was returned to Renault. Fate was unknown. Italian courts in January 2002 reopened the case, ruling that maternal heirs had been made in Bologna Court of Appeal. Full acquittal to Newey, while the case against the head was turned out under statute limitation. The retrial was done by Italian Highest Court in 2005. And the failures caused wide modification, and the responsibility fell on Patrick Head. However, Head was not arrested at all. And basically, still not guilty. Williams introduced its own video to prove the wavelength was normal, which David Coulthard handled in a steering wheel of the FW16B. Michele Alboreto testified in the courts in '97 that steering movement was abnormal, saying proves that something broke in Senna's Williams, and steering wheel moves a few centimetres. Although there's still lots of theories, the steering column was basically the main cause. However, after the race in Imola, Liverpool data research were called in to investigate allegations of cheating of using banned driver aids, traction control, launch control, both banned. Top three cars: Schumacher's Benetton, Louis' Ferrari, Häkkinen's McLaren, were investigated, and teams had their source codes to apply. Labrini and Ferrari were checked and complied. Nothing was found. However, McLaren and Benetton refused to give it. Citing copyright reasons, McLaren handed theirs in, but then they found permitted automatic gear shifts when it goes down the gears. McLaren tried to lie for it, but they were fined $100,000 for perverting the course of justice. On the 10th of May, Benetton sent an alternative suggestion, but then obviously tests on the 28th of June were cancelled because of non-disclosure agreements between Benetton and Cosworth, but then analysis that included software called launch control, a band aid. Benetton states it could only be switched on by recompilation of the code. LDRA found it to be untrue. Switched on by connecting the computer to the gearbox control unit. And to switch the system on, 10 visible options, however, scroll down to option 13, launch control could be enabled. Troy Whiting said that Schumacher was not within the rules at any point at whatever you call it during the weekend. Although the win still stood, this weekend will always be remembered for all of the wrong reasons. And Senna's and Ratzenberger's deaths were basically going on as the last two drivers to die in Formula 1 until Joe Bianchi lost his life in Suzuka 2014, although Bianchi would lose his life in the July of 2015. Formula 1 safety improved after 94, but it was greatly improved especially after the Bianchi accident. So much crashes have happened now, safer than rugby, safer than equestrian, shows that Formula 1 safety has improved. I'm Jeff Thomas, thank you for listening. Remember, like, share, subscribe. I know that this podcast is a bit down for everyone, but remember, safety is a priority. So, thank you for watching or listening. Goodbye.